Hey guys, tonight we're going to time travel through starlit Mesopotamian skies, where the air is thick with date palm scent, the irrigation ditches hum with frogs, and above it all, a silvery moon glides patiently across the heavens like a sleepy timekeeper with no wristwatch. Picture yourself walking through an ancient Babylonian city, your sandals scuffing over packed earth, past mud brick houses, street vendors muttering about lentils and cucumbers, and high above, that gleaming moon, the quiet regulator of feasts, fasts, and yes, lunch breaks. You live in a world before smartphones or even sundials, where time isn't shouted from a clock tower, but whispered by stars and murmured by water dripping slowly in a clay pot. Your belly is rumbling, but lunch isn't something you schedule. By noon, it's determined by the shadow your neighbor casts, or whether the moon has slunk behind the clouds. You probably won't survive long here without a bit of celestial guidance, to be honest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your day before dawn, not with an alarm clock, but with the soft glug-glug of a clepsydra, a Babylonian water clock, dripping rhythmically in the temple courtyard. It's still cool in the early hours, the thick Mesopotamian heat not yet fully pressing down on your shoulders. You shuffle to the riverbank, passing sleepy donkeys and grumbling bread vendors just starting to heat their clay ovens. The moon, pale and low in the sky, hasn't gone to bed yet, and you know your stomach won't start growling until it's higher. You're not alone in thinking that. Babylonians didn't exactly do time in the way we do. Instead of checking a dial or punching into a shift, you wait for the moon to rise or vanish or peek from a cloud. That simple act might determine not only when you eat, but also when the temple opens, when taxes are collected, or when the sheep should be corralled back in. For them, time was a slippery, moonlit thing. The moon, called Sin in Akkadian, sometimes, represented as a wise old god with a beard shaped like a crescent, wasn't just a rock in the sky. He was a calendar, a clock, and sometimes a cosmic party planner. His phases marked the days of the month, each one with different customs, omens, and yes, menu options. Unlike our modern weeks, Babylonian months flowed with the moon, beginning with its first sliver and winding through phases that signaled when to fast, when to feast, and when to just maybe not risk cooking anything too fancy, because the stars looked a bit edgy today. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians used a strictly observational lunar calendar, waiting to see the new moon, or whether they sometimes guessed ahead with backup math, like, well, cloudy last night, probably a new moon anyway. Let's call it day one. Either way, this meant that daily routines, meals included, were always subject to change. No one was scheduling brunch without first glancing at the heavens. On certain days, if the moon was in a particular phase, it was considered dangerous to eat certain foods. You might avoid garlic or postpone your lentil stew till the stars said it was safe again. And yet, even with all this celestial caution, people still needed to eat. Imagine you're part of a household preparing the mid-morning meal. You check the clay tablet calendar etched with star signs and temple decrees. Today's moon is at its zenith mid-morning, which, according to the priest astronomers, means it's a propitious hour for meals involving grains and legumes. Great. You and your cousin get to work peeling onions and tossing coriander seeds into a bubbling pot of barley. Porridge. Meanwhile, your uncle squints at the sky and says, "Don't add leeks today. Bad for the stomach under a waning gibbous." Is it true? Who knows? But better safe than cosmically sorry. You sit down cross-legged with a flatbread in hand, dipping it into the communal stew pot while keeping an eye on the sky. Meals like this aren't just about hunger. They're rituals, tethered to celestial cycles and shaped by generations of oral tradition. You're not just eating, you're participating in a lunar rhythm. One wrong move, a poorly timed garlic, clove, an egg cracked during an eclipse, and suddenly your grandmother's convinced you've doomed the harvest. The Babylonians believed the moon's glow held divine instructions, like a cosmic recipe card written in light. It wasn't uncommon for temples to post moon phase warnings. Some even hired specialists who did nothing but observe lunar behavior and advise local kitchens, scribes, and merchants. These Baru diviners could look at a cloudy crescent and declare, "Don't open the wine jars until the 3rd hour," or "Avoid lentils today unless you want a lawsuit." One fringe practice recorded in fragmentary tablets suggested watching how moonlight fell on your stew to see if it shimmered ominously. A bad sign. Did people believe this? Probably. Did it stop anyone from eating cold, pickled fish in the dark? Also, probably not. After all, hungry is hungry. Yet the moon remained central to the timing of everything. Births, burials, contracts, goat shearings, and yes, that all-important first midday bite. Sometimes, food offerings were left under the moonlight for divine approval before being consumed. Picture a lonely table outside the ziggurat temple at dusk, the moon peeking between columns and a single clay dish of stewed beans waiting for cosmic thumbs up. The priests might watch for an owl hoot or cloud drift as signs the gods had tasted it. Then the food would be brought inside and shared, usually cold, sometimes half-eaten by street dogs, but spiritually validated. A modern nutritionist would probably raise an eyebrow, but this was divine gastronomy. And so you, humble Babylonian citizen, learn to watch the moon, not just for light, but for lunch. It becomes your slow-swirling clock, your glowing grocery list, your reminder that even in ancient times, you couldn't just eat willy-nilly, not unless you wanted the stars to judge you. And yet, amid the rules and rituals, there's a strange comfort. Your meals, your rhythms, your rest, all marked by something silent and beautiful in the sky. As the crescent moon begins to rise again, you lean back on your elbows, stomach full of barley and roasted garlic, and feel gently tethered to something far older than time itself. You wake again just before dawn, not to the shrill bark of an alarm clock, but to the slow, earthy crackle of firewood and the soft murmur of voices somewhere beyond your mud brick walls. There's a thin fog of incense drifting in from the temple, complex, spiced and slightly acrid, and the ever-present scent of goat hair and old clay clings to your woven reed mat. The moon is barely a thumbprint above the western horizon now, pale and fading, and already someone in your neighborhood is consulting it with the kind of reverence we usually reserve for weather apps or angry supervisors. You throw on a wool and tunic, slightly itchy, as Babylonian wool often was, and head outside, where the street is coming alive in its own dusty, quiet way. The cobblestones are warm underfoot, the air thick with river humidity, and a few sleepy chickens complain as someone moves a cart stacked with leeks and turnips. In the distance, a water carrier calls out his daily rate, his voice half yawn, half sales pitch. It's too early for breakfast, and yet everyone's mentally calculating when lunch will hit. Not because anyone has a meeting to get to, but because that waning moon over the rooftops is sending mixed signals. See, this particular phase of the moon is a bit controversial. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians treated the 3rd quarter as auspicious or inauspicious. Some tablets warn of misfortune, while others suggest it was a perfectly fine time to roast fowl or do business, so long as you didn't also attempt any plumbing repairs or agricultural prophecies. You, for one, aren't about to test the waters. Last time you cracked an egg under the wrong phase, your cousin swore a camel gave you side-eye for 3 days. And while Babylonian society was deeply stratified, with priests, scribes, merchants, farmers, and slaves all inhabiting their own carved-out roles, one thing that unified nearly everyone was lunar timing. Whether you were poor or privileged, the moon didn't care. It passed judgment from above with the same cold glow, scheduling everything from royal decrees to peasant lunches with impersonal precision. Today, you're helping out at a local kitchen, near the temple, a dusty, fragrant alleyway where women squat over charcoal braziers, stirring pots of sour milk, frying onions, and muttering to themselves about moon signs. The menu's simple: sour barley porridge for the morning crowd, followed by spiced chickpea patties for midday. A priest's assistant arrives carrying a small clay token, stamped with a lunar glyph. He whispers to the head cook, who squints, up at the sky, and then adjusts the seasoning in the chickpea mix. "Less cumin today," she mutters. "Moon's on its left side." Is there any logic to that? Who knows? But in this society, logic bends to tradition, and flavour often follows omens. You help roll the patties, watching as the head cook flicks droplets of water onto a flat stone. They hiss and dance. She nods. Apparently, the moon approves. There's a rhythm to the kitchen, stirring, watching, glancing upward, that feels oddly calming. Everything is tethered to something larger, even if that something is a glowing white circle 240,000 miles away. One of the younger assistants, a girl with clever fingers and a tendency to hum off key, shows you a charm she wears around her neck. A crescent moon etched into soapstone. "Keeps your food from going bitter," she says solemnly, "especially under a cloudy waxing gibbous." You nod like you understand. After all, in Babylon, nobody wants bitter chickpeas. Later, when the meal is ready, it's not just dished out willy-nilly. There's a process. Food is blessed, sometimes waved under smoke, or laid momentarily in a sunbeam. If a cloud passes over the sun while you're holding a bowl of stew, you wait. If a dog howls and the moon is visible, you start over. These aren't hard rules etched into stone. They're lived customs, passed down and obeyed partly from respect, and partly because no one wants to be the one who cursed a meal. There are even lunar-specific eating spots. In certain phases, meals are eaten on rooftops to absorb the moonlight. In others, people stay indoors, shading their stew with palm leaves to avoid sky contamination. Historians still argue whether this was genuinely believed to ward off illness, or if it was simply a form of poetic food hygiene. Either way, the moon had opinions, and people listened. And while we might scoff at the idea of a stew needing lunar validation, it's not so different from modern rituals, is it? We microwave popcorn according to instructions, wait for toasters to ping, trust expiration dates printed in invisible ink. The Babylonians just added a bit of moonlight and mystery to their culinary routine. By midday, the temple shadows stretch long and thin across the plaza, and the sun feels like it's baking the very thoughts out of your skull. But even now, lunch isn't served until the water clock in the temple garden hits the right mark, and even that's cross-checked with moon position. A young acolyte, probably 13 years old and already taller than you, squints at the sky, then at a wax tablet etched with symbols. He gives a small nod. Somewhere, a bell rings. Lunch is declared safe. People trickle in from their stalls and shops, sitting on low stools, shielding their eyes. You chew slowly on a warm flatbread filled with pickled turnips and chickpea mash, the tangy vinegar notes balancing the dry heat. It's not fancy, but it's comforting. And in this moment, it feels like you're eating in harmony with the cosmos. A sleepy donkey wanders past. Someone pours a ladle of date syrup onto a shared tray. The moon, by now invisible in the bright sky, is still silently in charge. You can't see it, but you can feel its pull, like a quiet thread tying everyone's appetites together. And just as you're finishing your meal, an elderly merchant leans over and says, "Don't eat garlic at sunset today. The moon's not in the mood." You nod solemnly. Better safe than sorry. You step away from the midday crowd, full from your lunar-approved lunch, and make your way toward the Euphrates. The river's flow is low this time of year, the reeds whispering softly in the breeze, and though the sun bears down on the ancient city like an over-eager bricklayer, you find a patch of shade under a crumbling shrine wall where someone once carved the moon god's sigil with such care that it's still visible, despite centuries of dust storms and goat traffic. You run your fingers along the shape. A crescent, resting on a horizontal bar, like a smile trying to stay serious. This little symbol governs more than just lunch. It's the backbone of the Babylonian calendar. Back then, there was no concept of a weekend, no Friday movie night, no Sunday brunch with mimosas. Time itself was built on the rhythms of the moon. Each month began with the first visible crescent after the new moon, meaning temple watchers would climb rooftops at dusk, squinting westward, hoping to catch the faint silver arc before clouds or city smoke obscured it. If they missed it, the entire month might start a day late, which could shift festivals, court appointments, and, yes, even your meal plan. Historians still debate whether these sightings were purely observational or if some fudging happened behind the scenes. After all, if the king wanted a festival to fall on a more convenient date, who's going to argue with that? Especially when the calendar keeper's job was as prestigious as it was pressure-filled. Being off by a moon phase could mean messing up the barley harvest or serving goat stew during an unlucky omen day. You glance back toward the kitchens, remembering that cumin adjustment. It's all connected. Now picture this. You're invited to assist at the ziggurat, the stepped pyramid looming at the city's spiritual core, not for prayer exactly, but to help with the monthly moon-watching ritual. It's not glamorous. You're basically holding a torch while a robed priest chews on something herbal and peers dramatically into the darkening sky. The steps are steep, the torches spit and smoke, and the priest keeps muttering something about sinister conjunctions, while you fight the urge to sneeze. But there's a reverence to the whole process, a kind of holy tedium. When the priest finally declares the moon spotted, a scribe nearby scratches it into a clay tablet. Day 1 of the new month, he mumbles, like it's a weather report. But to the Babylonians, it's more than that. This one moment triggers an entire chain of events. Temple feasts, tax records, markets opening or closing, sacrifices scheduled, and all of it orbiting that small sliver of reflected light. You've never felt closer to the moon. It's like being backstage at a divine theatre, and the spotlight is 384,000 kilometers away. Down below, the city prepares for a new cycle. Bakers adjust their flour stock. Priests select which animals are unlucky this month. Even the palace, cloaked in scented linens and ego, hums with low-key urgency. You overhear a servant muttering, "He'd better not hold court on the 7th day. Bad for signing anything." Apparently, that day's moon position makes contracts flimsy. Whether that's celestial truth or just an excuse to avoid paperwork, who can say? But the king listens. He has to. The moon once decided when he was crowned. You wander toward the archives next, a surprisingly cool chamber tucked into the temple's belly. It smells of old clay and beeswax. This is where scribes keep the real treasure. Tablets and scrolls covered in cuneiform so dense they look like someone attacked the clay with a very angry bird's foot. One tablet in particular catches your eye. It charts the lunation cycle, a fancy phrase for how long it takes the moon to do its whole routine from new to full to new again. The Babylonians calculated it down to 29.53059 days, which is impressively close to the modern number. No digital clocks, no telescopes. Just careful watching, endless patience, and probably a lot of squinting. There's another tablet nearby that's even weirder. It doesn't track time exactly. It tracks moods. Specifically, how people are supposed to feel on certain moon days. Avoid travel on day 14. Good for planting onions, bad for speaking with in-laws. You chuckle. Some things never change. But imagine how intimate that relationship with the moon must have been, to let it steer not just time, but emotion, decision, appetite. Every scratch on these tablets reflects someone's long night spent staring up, waiting for the moon to speak. You pass a low wall where someone has etched what looks like a meal schedule. Breakfast, milk and dates. Favourable under a waxing crescent. Lunch, barley cakes. Only on even-numbered moon days. Supper, avoid lentils on full moons unless you want weird dreams. Is it science? Is it superstition? Or, as Babylon often proves, is it both? Historians still argue whether this level of lunar micromanagement was universally practiced, or mostly the domain of temple life and elite households. In some rural texts, you see a more relaxed approach, farmers noting the moon looked hungry tonight, and planting their turnips a few days late. But here in the city, the moon is more like a micromanaging boss, always watching, always judging, and possibly affecting your bloating. As the sky darkens again, you climb a small hill just beyond the city walls. The ziggurat's silhouette glows gently in the distance, torchlight flickering from its tiers. The stars come out one by one. And then, there it is. The moon. Not full, not new, somewhere in between. You feel its pull, not like gravity, but like a soft suggestion. Maybe skip the garlic again. Maybe leave the stew uncovered. You sit on a rock, fingers sticky from leftover dates, and just breathe. In this world, time is not a line. It's a circle drawn in chalk across the heavens. Tomorrow, someone will argue over when to start dinner based on where this glowing disc hangs. Tomorrow, a child will be told not to eat figs until the moon smiles again. Tomorrow, you might be the one looking up, whispering guesses into the dark. You wake the next day not to the crow of a rooster, but to the low rhythmic beat of temple drums. Thump, pause, thump, thump, which means someone up in the ziggurat has spotted a celestial oddity worth talking about. You rub your eyes, the scent of roasted barley still clinging to your skin, and shuffle through a city already halfway into its morning routine. Clay vendors are stacking their pots, spice merchants are fanning away flies with bundles of dried herbs, and a sleepy-looking priest nods at you with the sort of expression that says, "Yes, we're all still pretending this moon has answers. But here's the twist. In Babylon, the moon doesn't just tell you when to eat or rest or pray, it also tells you when to worry. There's a tablet you pass every day on your way to the river, and this morning you stop to read it again. A large baked clay slab with characters scored deeply enough to last through floods, fires, or one very determined goat. It's part of the Lunar Omen archives, and today it feels more pointed than usual. If the moon disappears on the third day and reappears with horns like daggers, there will be pestilence. Nice. You glance at the sky. It's cloudy. Does that count? That's the trouble with omens. They're specific until they're not. Historians still debate whether these omens were meant to be predictive or prescriptive. Were they warnings of fate or tools to influence behavior? Either way, people took them seriously. Priests kept enormous catalogues of moon-based prophecies, bad eclipses, crooked crescents, moons that turned red or refused to show up on time. A blood moon could signal an enemy invasion, a famine, or just that someone forgot to clean the sacrificial goat properly. And eclipses. Oh, those were theatrical. When the moon darkened, Babylonians would wail, bang drums, burn incense, and sometimes even place a substitute shadow king on the throne for a few days so the real king wouldn't. Catch any celestial bad vibes? Yes, really. Imagine being a poor farmer pulled into palace service because your haircut vaguely resembled the monarch's. Congratulations, you're the fake king for 3 days. Try not to get assassinated before dinner. You pass a group of children, drawing the moon in the dirt with sticks, arguing over whether last night's crescent curved too much or not enough. Their mother scolds them, saying, "Don't speak ill of the moon. It remembers." You believe her, or maybe you're just sleep deprived. Either way, the city seems jittery. Word spreads that the moon came back a little late last night, and now everyone's acting like it owes them money. At the bakery, a man refuses a loaf with a crust shaped like a full moon. "Bad luck," he mutters. At the herb stall, a woman buys triple her usual fennel supply, in case it's needed later. No one says, "In case of what?" But everyone seems to know. You duck into the temple archive to escape the rising sun and the rising sense of low-level doom. Inside, coolness settles on your shoulders like a damp shawl, and a senior scribe, eyebrows like caterpillars mid-duel, motions for you to help unroll a fresh chart. "We're tracking repeat patterns," he says, stabbing a finger at a timeline. "See here, same lunar wobble happened 27 years ago. What followed? Locusts." He nods, satisfied. You try to nod too, but your brain is still chewing on lunar wobble. Turns out, the Babylonians noticed that the moon doesn't follow a perfectly consistent path. It dances slightly, like a drunk moth circling a lantern. They didn't know why, no modern understanding of axial tilt or orbital mechanics. But they wrote down every wobble, every delay, every lunar stutter. And over centuries, they began to notice patterns. Some priests could predict eclipses with eerie accuracy, not because of math, well, not entirely, but because of decades of moon-watching habits passed down like family recipes. One particularly old priest even claims the moon has moods. "She likes us in spring," he says. "Always shows up on time." You nod again, this time with the polite intensity of someone humoring their grandpa about his lucky socks. Outside, you hear the drumbeat again. Closer now. Not ominous this time, more like a signal. A festival, perhaps. You hurry toward the sound and find yourself at the edge of a plaza filled with food stalls and dancers. Apparently, despite all the doom-tinted readings of last night's moon delay, someone found a reason to celebrate. "Moon Day Market," a sign reads, "Blessings for timing your trade to the stars." The scent of grilled onions, roasted lamb, and honeyed dates curls through the air like a hypnotic spell. You give in to temptation and buy a skewer of spiced pigeon. Don't judge. And listen as a food vendor explains that only today, under the current moon, is it safe to eat anything pickled. "Otherwise your stomach will revolt," he says, seriously. And revolt loudly. You chew carefully. It's good. Salty, a little tangy. No revolt so far. As you eat, your ears pick up snippets of conversation. A woman describes a dream where the moon turned into her dead grandmother and told her not to water the garden for 3 days. A merchant debates whether to sell his grain today or tomorrow based on the moon's angle. A street poet chants a half-rhyme. "When the crescent's sharp and blue, the hawk will fly, the goat will boo." You're not sure what it means, but it gets stuck in your head anyway. You continue walking, dodging dancers and incense smoke, until you reach the edge of the plaza, where a young boy is carving symbols into a patch of clay. He glances up and says, "You want to see tomorrow?" before pointing at a half-finished chart. It's not accurate, of course, just patterns he's copied from his father's scrolls. But you look anyway. It's oddly comforting, the idea that someone, somewhere, has tried to make sense of all this lunar chaos, that even in a world where the moon might bring plagues or blessings or strange cravings, someone's keeping track. You wonder if anyone 1,000 years from now will be squinting at your leftovers, trying to decipher why you avoided garlic on a waning gibbous. Probably not. But still. You smile at the boy, ruffle his dusty hair, and stroll back into the city, full of pigeon and paradox. Up above, the moon waits for its next cue. You make your way back through the narrow alleyways of Babylon, weaving past vendors, repacking morning leftovers into lunch portions, and children balancing clay pots on their heads with unsettling ease. The midday heat has settled in like a heavy velvet curtain, and there's a fine layer of dust clinging to everything, including your thoughts. But in Babylon, midday wasn't just a time to eat or nap. It was sacred, watched over not just by the sun god Shamash, but timed carefully by the moon's invisible sway. You duck into a shaded arcade near the temple district and sit beside an old man gnawing on a reed. "The moon's hiding now," he says, without looking at you. "This is when we count on memory." You glance at him sideways, half expecting more riddles, but he just chews and watches the patterns of sunlight shift across the pavement like he's waiting for some cosmic appointment to show up late again. In the Babylonian way of life, everything, even the parts of the day without the moon visible, was still influenced by its timing. The moon had phases, yes, but those phases had ripple effects, schedules, allowances. For example, certain foods weren't just lunar approved, but lunar assigned. On a waxing crescent, onions were welcome. On a waning gibbous, fish were discouraged. A full moon meant nuts and honey, and absolutely no lentils unless you wanted a night full of indigestion and cursed dreams. You think about the pickled pigeon from earlier. Was that crescent sanctioned? Probably. At least you haven't exploded yet. Historians still argue whether this food timing system was religious, practical, or both. One theory is that seasonal digestion actually played a role. Foods that stored better in dry months or fermented differently under certain humidity levels might have given people the idea that the moon was granting approval or punishment. Another school of thought suggests it was all a priestly plot to control trade rhythms and keep people dependent on temple-sanctioned markets. After all, if the temple calendar said no chickpeas until second quarter moon, and you wanted hummus, you better be tight with a scribe. You look around at the people streaming past. Women balancing jars of sesame oil, men arguing over the price of barley mash, and temple workers unloading baskets of unfamiliar fruit. A priest nearby scolds an apprentice for dropping a scroll, and you hear him mutter, "Great, now we'll never know if tonight's a good time to eat gooseberries." You don't even know what a gooseberry is, but you file the moment away. These little flare-ups of cosmic cause and effect thinking are everywhere. For Babylonians, the moon's rhythm was a kind of civic metronome, quiet, consistent, and always just slightly more complicated than necessary. There were even guidelines about when to start a fire depending on moon phase. One tablet insists that lighting a new hearth on the 4th day of a waxing moon brings wealth. Another warns that cooking lentils on a waning moon will make your children argumentative. You wonder how many poor families skipped meals just to avoid raising a future lawyer. You stretch your legs and move toward the city's waterway, where the Tigris hums quietly under stone bridges and reed barges drift like half-forgotten dreams. A young woman stands on a dock reading a water-level marker shaped like a lion's paw. She murmurs something about moontide pull, and though you know lunar gravity influence wasn't a known concept, Babylonians still believed that the moon affected river behavior. Tides were subtle here, but the moon's position could influence planting, irrigation, and even which days were best to dig a canal. You trail behind a fisherman pulling in a modest catch, mudfish, glimmering with silver. "Moon's been kind this cycle," he says. "Last month we caught mostly shoes." You're not sure if he's joking. Either way, he hands you a fish. It's still flopping. You hand it back. One of the things Babylon did with remarkable precision was align its lunar-solar calendar with daily practical needs. Imagine trying to organize harvests, taxes, religious festivals, trade caravans, and goat shearing schedules, all by glancing at the sky. Yet they did it. The calendar was divided not just by months, but by moments within months. Some auspicious, some forbidden, some just plain annoying. A tablet you'd seen earlier in the archives listed the 5th day of the month as unlucky for travel, but perfect for brewing beer. You guess if you couldn't leave town, you might as well drink. This timing web was managed by a specialized priestly class called the Tupsharu Enuma, or scribes of the time. These weren't just writers. They were trained observers, men who could read the moon's shape and position like a chef reads a recipe. Some even claimed to hear tones in the sky, lunar music that indicated whether a day would end with good fortune or just a stubborn headache. There's no evidence they were musically trained, but one surviving poem describes the moon as singing through the ink-dark heavens, her voice thin as a thread, yet sharp as winter rain. Poetic, yes, but also a little creepy. Still, you admire the dedication. These men would spend hours measuring shadows, noting star alignments, and cross-referencing moon slants with barley prices. The level of detail would make a modern meteorologist weep with envy. As you wander further into the city, you notice a quiet courtyard filled with sun-baked children playing a game that looks like a mix of hopscotch and astronomy. They leap across etched crescent shapes, yelling names of months with each jump. Nisanu, Ayaru, Simanu. You remember that each of those months began with a sighting of the new moon. No moon, no month. If the sky was cloudy and the moon couldn't be confirmed, bureaucratic chaos. People would wait a day or even two before declaring a new month had started, which meant rescheduling temple rituals, resettling debts, and, in at least one known case, postponing a royal wedding because the groom's horoscope was thrown off by a stubborn cloud. You feel a bit of sympathy for those astrologer priests now. The pressure of guiding a whole civilization using a celestial body that occasionally ghosted you must have been immense. And yet, here you are, benefiting from that careful madness, eating on time, trading on schedule, and watching moonrise with a sense of rhythm handed down through chisel and clay. The afternoon lengthens, and the shadows start stretching like sleepy cats. You settle onto a low bench beside a wall mosaic of Ishtar and her lion, the goddess mid-roar, forever frozen in a confident stride. Next to you, a small child sits cross-legged, clutching a piece of baked bread. "The moon told me to eat now," she says solemnly, crumbs decorating her chin. You nod. It's as good a reason as any. And honestly, in a world where time is just a slippery trick played by shadows and stars, the moon might be the most polite clock you'll ever meet. The heat of the Babylonian afternoon presses down like a velvet pillow, heavy and strangely comforting. You're ambling now through the quieter quarters of the city, where the rhythm of life feels slower, more secretive. Behind reed screens and mud brick walls, people prepare meals not just by recipe, but by ritual. Everything, from the way lentils are sorted to the exact minute sesame oil is drizzled over goat stew, follows an invisible schedule, and the moon is the head chef nobody dares to question. You pass an open courtyard where two older women sit, hunched over a pair of clay tablets. One is squinting, her finger following an incised line of cuneiform like it's a magical chant. The other is chewing her lip and frowning. You slow your pace just enough to hear her mutter, "If we eat on the 6th day, we offend Nana. If we wait till the 7th, the chickpeas will turn." You're not sure if this is theology or just dinner planning, but in Babylon, it's often both. Nana, of course, is the moon god, one of the oldest in the Mesopotamian pantheon. He's depicted as a bearded figure in a horned crown riding a boat across the sky, which sounds like something a medieval children's book would dream up. But to the Babylonians, he was serious business. His moods, phases, and absences governed not only public festivals and civic events, but the exact timing of personal activities, especially meals. You may be tempted to think this was just superstition, but consider this. Babylon had managed to operate on this lunar model for centuries, building a coherent society complete with trade networks, tax cycles, and reliable agricultural yields, all without a single app notification. Historians still argue whether this deep lunar integration was spiritual reverence or a clever way to hide scientific timing under divine branding. Either way, it worked. You duck into a shaded alley and follow the drifting scent of date cakes, being fried in palm oil. A young boy stands beside a stall, fanning the cakes with a leaf and watching the sky. "Still too early," he says, before plucking one off the griddle and hiding it behind a basket. You catch his eye. He shrugs. "The moon's not out yet." You suppose everyone cheats a little when the moon isn't looking. The cake smells phenomenal. You keep walking, only half proud of your self-restraint. In a nearby courtyard, a temple, cook is giving instructions to a trio of apprentices. She waves a wooden spoon like a general commanding troops. Remember, waxing moon means no garlic before midday, unless you're cooking for a scribe. Then it's double garlic. They need it for memory. One of the boys nods solemnly, while another tries not to cry over a sliced onion. Also, she adds, "Never serve millet porridge on the 12th day. It's unlucky, makes the tongue heavy and the stomach float." Again, you file this away, not because you plan to cook millet porridge anytime soon, but because it's yet another piece of the cosmic jigsaw puzzle that made up daily life in Babylon. The idea that food had timing not just of preparation, but of digestion, was a surprisingly advanced notion. Some surviving tablets describe meals in terms that sound eerily like digestive calendars. One passage suggests that lentils eaten during a waxing moon soothe the liver, while during a waning moon, they invite shadows into the gut. You imagine someone 3,000 years ago clutching their stomach and blaming the moon. To be fair, you've done worse after gas station sushi. Still, there's something elegant about using the cosmos to justify dietary discomfort. You make your way toward the Euphrates now, passing a row of storage houses where amphorae of olive, oil and date syrup are labelled with tiny wax seals, marked not with days, but with moon symbols, a crescent for fresh, a full disk for ripe, a dark circle with dots, spoiled, or possibly haunted. You're not sure. A man is weighing dried figs on a bronze scale and humming a tune that matches the cadence of moonrise prayers you've heard, echo from ziggurats at night. You ask him about it, and he nods. Helps the figs weigh evenly, he says. Figs like rhythm. You're not sure figs can hear, but he seems very confident. And who are you to argue with lunar horticulture? Further along the riverside, a small garden buzzes with bees and barefoot gardeners in tunics brushing pollen off their forearms. This place feels different, slower, more serene. The gardeners don't speak much, but they each wear a small amulet, shaped like the moon's various phases. One catches your gaze and says softly, "We plant by light, harvest by shadow." When you ask why, she simply points up at the sky. You wouldn't ask a shadow to bloom, would you? It's cryptic, but poetic. You nod like you understand, and she returns to watering her herbs with a bronze jug engraved with a line of Sumerian poetry about lunar dew. You learn that in Babylon, moon-timed gardening wasn't just superstition, it was rooted in seasonal logic. Waxing moons meant increasing light and rising energy, good for planting upward-growing crops like beans and cucumbers. Waning moons meant pulling energy downward, better for root vegetables and pruning. Whether or not this was scientifically accurate, the belief created consistency in farming practices across generations. Historians still debate whether these rituals emerged from trial and error farming wisdom or were imposed top-down by priest astronomers, eager to weave religion into agriculture. Probably both. You pass a temple storeroom where workers are inventorying barley and onions, calling out weights and dates that correspond to lunar days, not solar ones. One scribe jots down notes while chewing something green and bitter-looking. When you ask what it is, he replies, "Moonleaf, helps with clarity, tastes like regret." You take his word for it. As the afternoon deepens into early evening, you find yourself drawn toward one of the smaller shrines dedicated to Nana, the moon god. It's not grand like the ziggurat, but intimate, ringed by alabaster columns and thick with incense that smells like burnt cinnamon and old dreams. A priest is lighting a series of shallow oil lamps, each flame timed with a chant. You count them silently. 28, one for each day of the lunar cycle. He notices your attention and says, "Every flame eats like a man. If you feed it too soon, it gets greedy. Too late, and it sulks." He smiles, then offers you a date, stuffed with crushed pistachio. "This one's for the 20th day. Good for softening stubborn thoughts." You bite into it. It tastes like sweet earth and forgotten arguments. You sit with the priest for a while, watching the sky tint itself in shades of evening. One by one, stars appear. And finally, there it is, the moon, slipping above the horizon like a shy queen. Arriving late to her own coronation, the priest nods. Now the city knows it can sleep and eat leftovers. You chuckle, but deep down you realize he's not really joking. In Babylon, moonrise meant the day's decisions were sealed. You could rest because time had ticked on, visibly and faithfully. The moon had shown its face, and that meant you'd made it through another cycle, full of chickpeas, figs, moon-timed indigestion, and all. By now, you've come to understand that in Babylon, time doesn't just pass. It pulses. It sways. It flows in curves and arcs, like the pale path the moon traces over the ziggurat's crown each night. You walk through this rhythm as if wading, knee-deep into a river of tradition. Your movements synchronized with a system of timekeeping so old and so embedded that no one questions it anymore. Not the temple priests who calculate lunar eclipses with pebbles and ink. Not the street vendors who pack up early on the 9th day to avoid bad luck. Not even the children who time their afternoon snacks to when the moon rises pale against the lavender sky. You now find yourself inside a small archive chamber attached to a larger temple complex, a place where scribes, those indispensable human hard drives, spend their days copying, cataloging, and updating tablets that record every conceivable moment deemed worthy of memory. Dust hangs in the air like incense, and the light flickers with the lazy confidence of someone who's never met a clock. Here, you're led to a clay tablet marked with a series of symbols arranged in circular formation. A lunar calendar, older than some empires, etched carefully by a scribe who likely didn't expect his work to be scrutinized by you thousands of years later. The circular format isn't just for aesthetic purposes. It mimics the cycle of the moon itself, waxing, full, waning, new, a full round of 29 to 30 days. And it's not just religious dates and harvest timings marked here. There are entries for feast days, tax collection periods, rituals for dealing with ghosts, and most charmingly, when it is and isn't auspicious to eat particular dishes. One entry, translated awkwardly by a nearby apprentice, reads, "If the moon is a sliver and points like a sickle westward, then avoid lentils with fish. The stomach will quarrel with the soul." You marvel not just at the superstition, but the sheer poetic nerve of it. Even their dietary warnings read like myth. This was a world where reality and narrative danced together under the same night sky. As the apprentice continues decoding bits of the tablet for you, you notice that some entries are written with red-tinted ink, a rare and difficult dye to produce. You ask about it, and he whispers as if sharing a scandal. That's moon-watching protocol. These dates are for when Nana watches closely. These high-surveillance lunar nights were when behavior was expected to be extra pious. No shouting in the streets, no overly spicy food, no stealing of fruit or joking about one's in-laws. The idea that the moon had moods, or that it could turn its full attention toward you and judge your dinner choices, is both laughable and deeply moving. There's a certain tenderness in being watched over by something so distant, so timeless. Historians still debate whether these heightened observation nights were based on visible lunar changes, like supermoons or particularly low-hanging moons, or were arbitrarily assigned by priestly councils trying to scare people into being better neighbors. Probably both. What matters is the effect. The entire city would subtly shift in tone on these nights. Vendors offered discounts on milk and bread as a goodwill gesture. Storytellers avoided grim tales. Even the stray dogs barked less, or so people claimed. You exit the archive and find yourself back in the busy lanes near the temple kitchens. The scent of roasted onions and date vinegar clings to the air like gossip. A woman in a faded blue tunic is hawking little lunar pastries. Round, honey-glazed and stuffed with crushed almonds. She tells you they're only made during a waning gibbous. You raise an eyebrow, and she adds, "Too sweet during the full moon." People get foolish. You buy one and eat it slowly as you walk, half hoping for a bout of giddy irrationality. Around a corner, you stumble upon a group of teenagers playing a game with pebbles and sticks, and you ask them what the rules are. One boy explains, "You win by matching the moon's phase. Tonight is half, so half stones, half sticks." You try not to laugh at the confidence of this answer, especially since the rules seem made up on the spot. But then, isn't that what timekeeping is? A clever fiction agreed upon by enough people for it to become reality. You smile and nod solemnly, earning approving nods in return. Kids like it when adults don't mock the moon. Later in the day, you visit a healer who's known locally as a moon listener. His practice is built into the back of a house and smells of sandalwood and boiled beetroot. He explains that certain illnesses are caused not by spirits or poisons, but by mistiming one's actions with the moon. Sleep before the third day, and your dreams won't grow, he says, brushing a bit of chalk off your shoulder. Eat onions on the 14th, and your thoughts will become sharp but sour. His toolkit includes crushed herbs, pressed reeds, and a miniature lunar calendar carved into bone. He presses your pulse gently, as if reading the tide inside you. Then he hands you a small flat cake of barley and tells you to eat it on the next crescent moon while sitting by water. Your stomach has forgotten how to rest, he says, with the gravitas of someone revealing your zodiac sign. You thank him and exit, barley cake in hand, not entirely sure whether you've been healed or hypnotized. The more you think about it, the more it makes sense. If you measure your work, sleep, harvests, and meals by the moon, then why not your moods? Why not your aches? The moon becomes not just a timekeeper, but a co-author of your life. As the sky begins its slow shading into night, you return to the ziggurat steps to watch the moon rise once more. A small crowd has gathered. Families, couples, solitary watchers, each quietly waiting for that silver curve to lift above the city walls. When it finally appears, there's a soft ripple through the group. Not applause, but a collective exhale, a kind of lunar sigh. You sit on a warm stone step and listen as an old man next to you mutters something about the moon being a tired god tonight. You don't ask for clarification. You're starting to understand that in Babylon, not everything needs explanation. Sometimes you just let the moon do its thing, and you time your leftovers accordingly. You rise before the sun does, wrapped in the soft hush that settles over a city when even its most insistent roosters have the decency to wait. The alleys of Babylon lie still and shadowed, the bricks beneath your feet still cool from the desert. Night. You follow the same path the priests take on ritual mornings, a zigzag through grain stalls, past a bakery already lighting its ovens with olive pit coals, and toward the east-facing edge of the ziggurat platform. Today, you're here to understand something peculiar, how Babylonians managed to turn lunar patterns into actual scheduling tools for everyday work, especially in agriculture. You might assume that growing crops is a simple matter of water and sun, but here it's more about timing your ploughing, sowing, and even weeding to match the moon's changing face. You settle beside a farmer, sharpening a bronze hoe, his hands thick with calluses, and his hair tucked beneath a linen scarf. He doesn't greet you, just nods, and begins to talk as if continuing a conversation that started long before you arrived. Third night after the new moon, he grunts. You break the soil, not second, too much root rot. You ask why, but his only answer is a shrug and the word Nana, the moon god. It's not about cause and effect. It's about harmony with cycles older than the city itself. He waves you along, and you soon find yourself among a field of tall emmer wheat where two boys chase crows with bells tied to their belts. One of the older field hands shows you a simple lunar calendar scratched into a piece of fired clay, not much bigger than a hand mirror. It's divided into thirds, labelled with symbols for root, shoot, and fruit, each corresponding to a part of the lunar cycle. You plant beans here, she says, pointing to the shoot section, because the moon lifts water, makes them stand taller. You realise these aren't metaphors. These farmers are watching the sky and adjusting their labour day by day, not just for religious reasons, but because they truly believe lunar gravity affects the very way their crops behave. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were based on consistent observation or passed down as sacred tradition with only vague trial and error. Likely a mix of both. What's undeniable is that Babylonian farming wasn't guesswork. It was choreography. You don't just plough. You dance with the moon. You time your motions to a rhythm you can't touch, but feel deep in your ribs. By midday, the fields shimmer with heat, and you retreat toward a shady grove near a barley field, where you find a group of women boiling onions and lentils in a clay cauldron. One of them is stirring the pot clockwise, then counterclockwise, in time with the recipe carved into a tablet propped on a flat stone nearby. The instructions aren't just culinary, they're astrological. Add garlic when the moon is gibbous, it advises. Too early, and it will burn the throat. You ask about the logic, and a young cook with sunburned cheeks replies, garlic grows under the moon. If it sees too much sun in cooking, it rebels. You chuckle quietly, but she doesn't. These aren't metaphors here, they're lived truths. Lunar cooking calendars were common in Babylon, blending seasonal wisdom with spiritual lore. And apparently, if you serve something out of phase with the moon, your guests might not just complain, they might curse you, or worse, gossip behind your back about how unbalanced your table was. It strikes you that the moon wasn't just telling them when to eat, but also how to live, how to host, and how to be seen as respectable. Kind of like an ancient Yelp review, but glowing faintly in the sky instead of posted on your front door. You head back toward the inner city, just in time to watch a priest on a rooftop conducting something like a lunar inventory. He's using a long, forked stick with a bit of silver leaf tied at the end to mark the moon's height. Beneath him is a table where 3 scribes record observations. They're not just checking brightness, they're comparing current lunar, tilt, color, and rise time with old records. Last year the moon arrived late, one mutters, and we had mildew on the grape leaves. Another nods gravely. The moon's lateness is a bad omen. Delayed light brings mold. Again, it's unclear whether these beliefs stem from astronomy or agriculture, but it doesn't really matter. The important thing is that it's written down, documented, preserved. You glance at the scribe's clay tablets and notice something else. Marginal notes written in different hands, some correcting earlier dates, others noting strange animal behavior on certain nights. Foxes howled early on the 22nd, one note reads. Possible sign of inverted moon energy. You wonder whether these notes were scientific observations, or just the Babylonian version of keeping a dream journal. Either way, they're doing something we rarely bother with in our own modern lives. They're noticing, closely, continuously. You start to wonder whether your own patterns, your headaches, your missed buses, your soggy laundry might all be easier to manage if you just kept better moon records. By evening, you find yourself seated inside a tiled courtyard surrounded by fig trees and oil lamps. A storyteller has begun to gather a circle of eager listeners, mostly children, but a few elders as well. He's spinning a tale about a shepherd who angered the moon by whistling at it and was cursed to wander in circles forever unless he could time his footsteps to the lunar beats. At one point, he taps a small drum, once for new moon, twice for crescent, 3 times for full, and the children echo the rhythm with soft claps. The adults smile, but you can tell they're listening just as closely. These stories aren't just for fun, they're instruction manuals hidden in poetry. Through them, children learn when to plant, when to fish, when to rest, and even when to forgive. You close your eyes as the tale continues, letting the rhythm of the drum and the warm night air blend into one. The moon finally peeks through the canopy above, and someone calls out its phase, waxing half. A collective murmur rises. People begin to talk about what tomorrow requires. Who needs to wake early? Who should offer fruit at the temple? Who must avoid spicy food? This isn't superstition. It's structure, comfort. Like a cosmic parent quietly nudging you toward better behavior. You rise slowly, feeling like a cog in a great silver gear that turns over the city each night. Everything flows in cycles here. Not just time and work, but patience, stories, meals, and even misfortunes. You begin to sense how deeply peaceful this system could be, not because it guarantees control, but because it reassures you that chaos has its own rhythm too. A rhythm you can follow, even if it means eating your garlic on the right night. You wake to the sound of a slow, rhythmic splashing, like someone stirring the Euphrates with a ladle the size of a house. The city is already humming, though the sun hasn't yet crested the brick skyline of Babylon. Today, you follow a group of temple scribes walking briskly toward the riverbank, clay tablets under their arms, styluses tied neatly into their belts. They don't break stride, nor do they greet the vendors still arranging dates and dried fish on woven mats along the road. Their pace tells you one thing. This isn't just a morning stroll. This is data collection, and the kind of data that could make or ruin an entire city block. Their job? Observing the moon's mirrored reflection in the waters and measuring how ripples, angles, and even color tone align with seasonal lunar forecasts. Historians still argue whether Babylonian priests truly believed the river could speak the moon's moods, or whether it was a clever method of indirect observation, useful when the sky was clouded or the moon too faint to follow directly. Either way, the practice was sacred. The Euphrates, after all, was Nana's mirror, and you never disrespect a god's mirror. The lead scribe crouches by the water's edge, his sandals squelching into river mud. He waits. When the wind stills, he signals the others, who lower a bronze disc the size of a dinner plate into the water and note how many ripples it takes before the moon's reflection reforms clearly in the disc's center. 5 ripples, the lead mutters. Like last year. We'll get mist soon. Expect mold on the lentils. One of the younger scribes frowns and asks if he should write that as forecast or omen. The elder shrugs. Write both. Let the gods and bakers sort it out. You love this. How casually mystical and bureaucratic it all is at once. They're forecasting weather and divine approval in the same breath, and the system somehow works. These river lunar readings are not just for idle curiosity. Temple records indicate that irrigation schedules, pest control rituals, and even witch festivals to delay or advance were all tied to this practice. It's less like weather forecasting, and more like city planning by starlight. You can almost hear a mayor somewhere muttering, "We can't throw the beer festival during a waning crescent. The turnips will taste bitter, and the moon priests will throw a fit." As the scribes wrap up, one of them invites you to follow him to the temple complex, a sprawl of stone courtyards, altars, and palm-shaded galleries that smell faintly of incense and wet clay. Here, lunar timing wasn't just agricultural, it shaped the very rhythm of ritual life. You arrive just in time to see a priestess adjusting the temple's water clock, a kind of stone basin that drips in exact increments to mark the hours. It's a quiet, mesmerizing device, calibrated daily based on the moon's phase. Full moons make us generous, she tells you, adjusting a wax seal. So we let more water pass, for mercy, for indulgence. When the moon shrinks, we tighten the flow. Remind people that time contracts. You realize this isn't superstition, it's behavioral psychology baked into infrastructure. The people actually experience time differently, depending on lunar phase, because the clock changed how fast or slow the hours seemed to pass. A longer hour meant priests gave longer blessings, bakers let dough rise more, lovers lingered. During waning moons, sacrifices were made quickly, arguments settled faster, and sermons trimmed to essentials. It's brilliant. You think of all the digital clocks around your life now, utterly indifferent to whether you're in a waxing or waning mood. No wonder time feels rigid and stressful. Later that afternoon, you find yourself seated beneath a wall carved with moon glyphs, waxing crescents, bulls, boats, sickles, all symbols linked to various aspects of lunar influence. A teenage apprentice, with ink-stained hands, is copying them into a practice tablet. This one means harvest moon, she explains. We use it to tell when figs are too sweet to store. They burst if you wait too long. She goes on to show you another glyph, this one shaped like a curled fishhook. That means danger of bloating, mostly for sheep and young men. You blink. Excuse me? She grins. There's a belief that during this moon phase, if you overeat, especially lentils or river fish, you'll swell up. Not die, just puff out and regret your life choices. It sounds like an old wives' tale, but then again, so did avoiding garlic on certain nights, and that turned out to be culinary canon around here. These glyphs, hundreds of them, are used in everything from dream interpretation to inventory management. Temple archivists catalogue them like today's emojis, assigning emotional tones and logistical instructions to each lunar mood. Some scholars argue these glyphs weren't just symbolic. They functioned as a proto-scientific shorthand, like a cross between weather apps and wellness journals. You love that Babylon managed to turn moonlight into footnotes. It makes your phone's calendar app look a little sad. Evening draws near, and the city's colours change, from the glare of dust-coloured walls under sunlight to the soft blues and silvers of moonrise. You join a group of musicians preparing to play near the temple gates. They've been waiting for the moon to pass a certain star, Aldebaran you overhear, before striking their first note. Too early, the lead flutist mutters, and you spoil the harmony. He taps his instrument lightly against his palm, more to warm it than to tune. You realize that music here isn't just entertainment. It's timed to celestial alignments. Certain scales are forbidden during eclipses. others only allowed when the moon is in its third quarter. You listen as the music finally begins. Soft, reed flutes interwoven with drum beats so gentle they feel like a second pulse in your chest. One of the melodies is said to mimic the moon's orbit, rising, dipping, disappearing. You find yourself swaying without meaning to. The sound isn't just pretty, it's structured, grounded in a belief that the moon's shape should be echoed, in human emotion, and not just for comfort, but for calibration. Before bed, you wander back toward your lodging, a simple two-room home with plaster walls, reed mats, and a small rooftop ledge for night air. You pass a group of elderly women sharing dried fruit and gossiping under the stars. They're arguing about whether this moon cycle will bring more rats or more weddings. One of them cackles and says, "Sometimes both. Rats like rice. Grooms like rice. It's a dangerous season." You laugh quietly, and one of them pats the ledge beside her, inviting you to sit. "Tell us, stranger," she says, "how does your city listen to the moon?" You fumble for an answer and realize your city doesn't. Not really. You tell her we use electricity, schedules, alarms. "Ah," she says with a kind smile. "So your moon must be lonely." You lie on your back and stare up. The moon tonight is fat and drowsy, swaddled in a haze of city smoke and wood-fire drift. You think about the river ripples, the water clocks, the puffing lentils, the whispering flutes, how every corner of Babylon seems to pulse with lunar logic. Not because they're obsessed with control, but because they understand surrender. The moon doesn't hurry. It doesn't bark orders. It only suggests. It pulls gently. It reminds. And Babylon listens. You close your eyes and decide, for once, to listen too. You wake the next morning to the muffled clatter of sandals on clay rooftops. Early risers already bustling across the upper levels of the city, like ants following invisible lines. Babylon doesn't really sleep. It just hums softer after dark. And when the moon is high and full, like last night, that hum lingers in your chest long after sunrise. Today, you're tracing a different rhythm, not just the moon's glow or its watery twin on the Euphrates, but how it literally sculpted the structure of the Babylonian calendar, and by extension, almost every part of daily life, from market days to milk deliveries, birthday feasts to temple penalties. Everything flowed along a path drawn by moonlight. You duck into the archives again, where a stone scribe, his voice hoarse from decades of dictation, begins to explain how it all worked. "Each month begins with the first visible crescent," he rasps. "You miss that. You've lost the month." And that wasn't just poetic. The very word for month in Akkadian, Arhu, means both moon and month, which should tell you just how tightly the two concepts were fused. There was no separate, abstract grid of days independent of the sky, just the heavens unrolling slowly above you, one crescent at a time. But it wasn't a clean, factory-stamped 30-day cycle either. Babylonian months floated somewhere between 29 and 30 days, depending on the mood of the moon and the willingness of temple authorities to squint hard enough through cloud cover. And here's where things get wonderfully absurd. Entire civic decisions sometimes hinged on whether the moon was visible on a particular night. If it wasn't, they might delay the start of a new month. Imagine missing your rent payment because it rained and the moon didn't show up. Technically, it wasn't the first of the month yet. Historians still argue whether this was a clever way to add flexibility to an otherwise rigid calendar system, or simply a divine excuse for ancient procrastination. But it worked, more or less. Festivals were scheduled, debts were settled, and rice shipments dispatched based on these sightings, with temple astronomers and priests collaborating to adjust the year as they went. Every few years they'd add an entire extra month, known as a second Ululu or second Adaru, depending on the season. These intercalary months were like ancient leap years, shoved in whenever the lunar calendar drifted too far from agricultural reality. You watch as a junior scribe pulls down a thin tablet detailing one such adjustment. In the year of King Nabu Apla Iddina, it reads, "The barley was late, the moon rose strangely, and so we added a second month." Just like that, 1 extra month of taxes, birthdays, weddings, and moonlit goat herding. And while our modern ears might twitch at that chaos, the Babylonians built systems to absorb it. Each temple had calendar keepers who worked closely with farmers, market leaders, and even shepherd guilds to ensure the shift didn't wreck the whole economy. One calendar priest grins as he tells you, a misplaced month can cost a king his head, but it can also make a baker rich. Turns out, if you timed your bakery to open during a rare 30-day stretch with 2 festivals, you could corner the honey cake market for weeks. Back in the temple courtyard, a group of apprentices are practicing chants tied to specific lunar days. You catch snatches of song. On the 3rd day, rest your ox. On the 6th, beware of dreams. On the 15th, the moon becomes the judge. Each line matches up with a ritual or taboo. You learn that certain days in the lunar cycle were deemed lucky, ideal for planting, traveling, or confessing misdeeds. Others were cursed. One man recounts how his uncle once proposed marriage on the 19th day of a month, a day notorious for turning hearts sour. She laughed in his face and married his brother, he shrugs. The moon was watching. It sounds petty until you realize just how institutionalized this was. Even royal edicts often came with timestamps, not just of year and month, but of lunar phase. Issued on the 3rd day of the waxing moon, under the favor of Nana. Not because they feared the moon as a god throwing tantrums, but because they understood that time wasn't neutral. Some moments were fertile, others fallow. You don't plant onions in frost or file taxes on a hangover. And they didn't petition gods under a waning moon. As you wander back into the city's heart, you spot a group of traders adjusting their caravan schedules at a small plaza calendar, carved into a wall. They're debating whether to leave today or tomorrow, depending on the moon's angle. One older man squints at the carving and declares, "Too close to the goat's horn, bad for crosswinds." You suppress a smile. It sounds made up. But another trader nods seriously and replies, "Then we wait. Bad crosswinds break carts." These carvings show not just moon shapes, but their position relative to constellation symbols. Bulls, lions, fish, and yes, goats. It's an informal zodiac system used to layer meaning into already complex lunar days. Some scholars debate whether this system truly influenced travel decisions, or if it was more of a symbolic map, like when we say Mercury is in retrograde, and then blame our bad coffee. But in Babylon, even a symbolic map can become a travel ban. You pass a classroom near the ziggurat, where a teacher is drilling her students on month names and their festivals. "Nisanu," she calls. "New Year." The king bathes in the river. "Ayaru," replies a sleepy boy. "Time to clean the god's shoes." You learn that each month had its distinct character, shaped by lunar rhythm, seasonal chores, and religious duties. Some months were heavy with mourning rituals. Others were celebratory, stuffed with parades and puppet shows. Wild drinking and golden statues paraded through the streets, and all of them began the same way. A few officials, peering at the night sky and deciding whether they'd seen the right sliver of moon. One of the students raises her hand and asks what happens if 2 cities disagree on the start of a month. The teacher nods gravely. Then someone visits the king. You imagine that, a frantic envoy racing from Uruk to Babylon to argue about whether a cloud was too thick to confirm a crescent, and behind it all, the quiet patience of the moon, unbothered. That night, you climb again to your rooftop. The city is quieter now, save for the chirp of insects and the distant laughter of someone who has clearly had too much barley wine. You bring with you a wax tablet and scratch out the lunar cycle yourself. 30 neat circles, from full to gone and back again. You add notes. Day 5, good for trade. Day 12, avoid decisions. Day 22, sing to the oven so bread rises sweet. You have no idea if these rules will hold in your own life, but it feels right. Not because you need to believe in moon magic, but because you're starting to notice the rhythm, the way everything in Babylon breathes with the sky. A baker adjusts her sourdough starter because she knows the yeast ferments differently in full moonlight. A temple guard lights fewer lamps on waning nights because shadows are more polite then. A boy wakes from a nightmare and murmurs, "The moon was hiding," and his mother nods solemnly. Then it will listen better tomorrow. There's no panic, no alarms. Just a gentle choreography between light, time, and life. You lie back and breathe with it. The moon arcs slowly overhead, one more notch on the city's eternal calendar. It doesn't need to be fast, just faithful. You wake again to the rustle of palm leaves overhead, the soft gurgle of a courtyard fountain somewhere nearby, and a camel groaning in protest as it kneels beside its sleepy handler. It's a typical Babylonian morning, dry, amber-lit, and already hinting at heat. But today, you're not headed for the temple or the archives. No, today you're tagging along with one of the city's lesser-known specialists, a lunist. That's right, a person whose entire job revolves around reading the moon, not just for calendars or festivals, but to schedule meals. Sound odd? Of course it does. But here in Babylon, where everything from treaty signings to haircut days is scheduled according to lunar phases, even lunch has its place in the rhythm of the cosmos. You follow your guide through a back alley layered with broken clay plates and the occasional stray chicken. "We eat when the moon says to," she explains matter-of-factly. "You don't argue with the moon, you'll lose your appetite." She's joking, sort of, because while Babylonians weren't exactly ruled by their stomachs, they were deeply invested in timing nourishment with celestial favor. Lunar mealtimes sound like something out of a TikTok astrology hack, but for the ancient Babylonians, they reflected a profound belief in cosmological harmony. Certain days in the lunar month were believed to be more nourishing, more digestively favorable, or even spiritually clean for eating. And it wasn't just superstition. Some priests swore that bread baked under the waxing moon would rise better and cause fewer stomach upsets. One fringe theory, you're told by a passing merchant with suspiciously good teeth, even claimed that the moonlight strengthened barley's life essence if harvested on the right night. You squint. Maybe. Historians still argue whether these dietary rules were deeply encoded in religious doctrine or more loosely connected to seasonal cycles. But either way, it shaped how the Babylonians planned their daily meals. You watch as a group of workers on a break unroll a large cloth, carefully laying out pickled onions, dates, roasted locusts, yes, seriously, and a flaky sort of bread that's somewhere between naan and a biscuit. One man politely declines, citing bad moon day, which apparently is not a hangover excuse but a real observance. "I'll eat tomorrow," he assures his friends. Nana's in a better mood then. It's not just about what's lucky, it's also about what's sacred. On certain high lunar days, specific foods were forbidden. You're told with hushed reverence that eating garlic on the full moon was once considered a mild sacrilege. In certain temples. "Too aggressive," says a vendor who sells small bundles of herbs. "The moon is tender. Don't offend it." And on the flip side, other foods were recommended precisely for their lunar resonance. Milk, for instance, was considered a moon-blessed substance, probably due to its pale color and life-sustaining quality. A temple cook confides that during moon festivals, they'd sometimes shape cakes into little crescents and decorate them with sesame to mimic craters. Cute, right? Until you remember that this is also the culture that catalogued more than 70 omens based on the moon's halo shape, direction, and phase. So yes, even a cake might be a sacred offering disguised as dessert. You step inside a family kitchen built around a simple clay oven and a few bronze utensils. It smells like date syrup and ground cumin, the air thick with wood smoke and lightly fermented grain. Your host, an elderly woman with wrists like woven rope, is preparing a meal specifically timed for the moon's second quarter. "It's a good phase," she explains, slicing dried fish with effortless precision. "The moon is growing. So should we." That's the general logic here. Waxing phases are for building, expanding, nourishing. Waning phases, good for fasting, shrinking, and letting go. Not every household follows the pattern strictly, but enough do that the logic trickles into wider culture. Trade guilds might declare a fast day on the 26th of a lunar month. A local physician recommends barley broth for waxing days and bitter herbs when the moon thins. You see, this isn't about starvation or luxury. It's a kind of synchronized living. Eat when the moon fattens, rest when it fades. And it gets weirder, because even the time of day for meals could shift depending on the lunar reading. A junior temple clerk shows you his moon-feeding tablet, where time blocks are arranged not by sundials, but by which moon quadrant is active at sunset. If the moon is crossing Taurus, eat light, he says. If it's in Leo, don't skip breakfast. It will punch back. Again, it sounds a bit much until you realize that most Babylonians weren't following these rules out of fear. They genuinely thought it kept them balanced. Not spiritually, but metabolically. A well-fed person, at the right time of the month, was thought to sleep better, think faster, and even remember dreams more clearly. You're sharper, says a guard near the northern gate. The moon makes your brain slick, like oil. It's unclear if he's quoting a proverb or improvising. Either way, you nod solemnly. A slick brain sounds useful. At the heart of all this moon meal madness is the sacred rhythm of preparation. No one rushes food. A stew might simmer for hours just because a lunar chant isn't finished yet. Bread might wait an extra night to rise, not because of yeast, but because the moon hasn't blessed it. Children are taught not just recipes, but timing. Boil lentils on the 5th, a boy recites. Crush garlic on the 8th. Offer honey only on a full. You sit in on a children's song class where the lyrics double as a cookbook/calendar. The kids chant in unison. When the moon is round and wide, keep your butter safe inside. When the moon begins to fade, roast your chickpeas in the shade. You don't know whether to laugh or start writing it down for your next meal plan. You're invited that evening to a community meal aligned with the first sliver of a new moon. A moment seen as spiritually clean and full of promise. The courtyard glows with torches, but everyone's eyes are on the sky, waiting for that delicate crescent. When it appears, there's a soft cheer, and the feast begins. The food is simple, but beautifully arranged. Lentils with sumac, grilled goat meat, rice folded with raisins and flatbreads so fresh they still hiss when broken. Your host pours you a cup of date beer and toasts quietly to beginnings. You ask him if people ever eat out of sync, ignore the moon entirely. He shrugs. Sure, but they miss the flavor. And it clicks. Not the taste, but the flavor of timing. The sensation that your meal belongs in this exact moment, under this exact sky. As you settle down for the night, belly warm and head buzzing with moon-fueled customs, you realize the Babylonians weren't ruled by the moon. They dined with it. They paced their stomachs not by hunger, but by celestial alignment. The idea wasn't to dominate nature, but to dance with it. You lie back, watching that crescent rise just a little higher, and wonder, what would it feel like to eat only when the moon smiled? Would your body learn to trust the sky? Would lunch become sacred again, not just a calendar notification? In Babylon, it already has. You wake to the clink of polished stone cups being carefully set on smooth reed mats, the scent of sweet beer thick in the air, and the steady beat of pestles grinding lentils and barley in massive communal kitchens. Today in Babylon, you're entering the bustling heart of a ritual few outsiders ever get to witness, the moon-blessed food offerings. This isn't just about eating when the moon says it's okay. This is about feeding the gods themselves, placing bowls and trays of richly symbolic foods at altars timed precisely to lunar events. If you thought syncing your lunch to a full moon was a little quirky, welcome to the next level, heavenly catering. You're led into the inner courtyard of a ziggurat, where dozens of temple assistants, cooks, and high-ranking priests buzz around, in harmonious chaos. And at the center of it all, a calendar, not of dates, but of moon phases, complete with markings in red ink showing exactly which offerings should be prepared at what times. You lean in and read notes like, 3rd quarter, goat cheese, 2 fish, honey cake, no garlic. Everything down to the tiniest sprig of herb, is moon certified. Historians still argue whether these offerings were genuinely believed to nourish divine beings, or if they were more symbolic, like heavenly RSVP cards letting the gods know their worshippers were still paying attention. What's clear, though, is that for Babylonians, the moon was the head waiter. If the full moon rose on the wrong day, certain foods couldn't be offered until the next cycle. That meant entire festivals might be delayed, not because of politics or weather, but because the sky wasn't ready. You watch a temple baker gently score a batch of crescent-shaped cakes, muttering an old hymn under her breath. It's not for flavor, she tells you, with a sideways smile. It's so they'll know we listened. You nod, though you're not sure who they are. Then again, in a world where invisible forces ruled time, crops, and stomachs, baking for the moon doesn't feel that strange. Out in the wider city, lunar offerings weren't just a priestly ritual, they were a public performance. On certain nights, neighborhoods would gather around small shrines, placing trays of food beneath moonlight and sharing hushed toasts of date wine. Children were allowed to carry tiny bowls of lentils shaped into stars, and old women would chant, songs urging the moon to accept the feast and bring good dreams. One fringe practice you spot involves offering a raw onion wrapped in silver thread to appease the hungry moon. A local variation most scholars dismiss, but which continues in some households to this day. When you ask why, the answer comes from a wrinkled spice merchant who leans close and says, "If the moon wakes up angry, your bread won't rise, and your child will forget their own name." He smiles, possibly joking. Probably. You move through a side corridor into a cooling chamber where certain offerings are stored before they're ritually burnt or buried. Here, the smell is rich with dried figs, toasted grains, and a pungent sourness you can't quite place. The chief cook explains that some moon foods are intentionally fermented or overaged because, quote, "the moon enjoys the patience." You almost laugh until he shows you a bowl of month-old fish paste, sacred to a minor moon deity, that's been sealed under a cloth covered in lunar symbols. Apparently, it's just reaching peak aroma. You try not to breathe through your nose. One mainstream belief holds that offerings left too fresh were seen as disrespectful, too rushed, too impatient. Just as humans must wait for the moon's cycle, so must the food. A weird logic, but kind of poetic. You start to see how even rotting fish paste could become sacred if enough people agreed on its timing. One unexpected discovery is that food offerings weren't only for the moon gods. They were also used to honor past lunar readings, specific moments in time when the moon had granted victory, healing, or rainfall. You spot a small shrine dedicated to the moon of the red fields, referencing a rare full moon that supposedly brought a bumper barley harvest. Each year, a special porridge is offered in its honor, thick with walnuts and honey. "It tastes like memory," says a teenage boy who has never actually tasted it, because it's eaten only by the priests. Still, he speaks of it with the reverence most kids reserve for celebrity gossip or sports stats. In Babylon, even porridge gets a backstory. Your guide takes you to a small courtyard on the city's western edge, where merchants and travelers make casual offerings as they pass through. Here the rules are looser. You see a bowl of goat meat placed next to a handful of chickpeas and a carved radish. Apparently, the moon accepts casual offerings too, especially from those in transit. One older trader tells you he never leaves the city without feeding the sky, as he calls it. "I give it what I can, even if it's a crumb." The moon sees who remembers. You sit beside him for a while, watching the sky turn a soft indigo. As the moon begins to rise, a soft murmur spreads among the people nearby. Some kneel, some raise their cups. A young girl sings a tune barely louder than a whisper. It doesn't feel like religion, exactly. It feels like community choreography, synchronized not by music, but by moonlight. Inside the temple once more, you're permitted to witness the actual lunar offering ceremony. It's simple, but deeply sensory. A priest chants while slowly circling the altar, scattering flour in patterns shaped like crescent moons. Two young assistants carry in trays, one with meat, one with flat cakes, one with dates arranged into a perfect spiral. A fourth brings in a bowl of beer, which is poured onto the ground while the priest recites the moon's many names. Watcher, counter, lighter of the paths, keeper of the cold, time's friend. The food is then placed before a tall sculpture of the moon god's sin, lit only by reflected moonlight entering through a hole in the ceiling. No one speaks, no one blinks. For a moment, even the insects outside go silent. It's a moment of suspended time, as though the entire city has paused to hand the night its supper. Once the offering is complete, most of the food is either consumed by temple staff the next day or distributed to the poor. The moon doesn't eat, everyone knows that, but giving the food to others, especially those without, is seen as the moon's way of feeding the people. It's a graceful loop of charity disguised as ritual. You help carry a tray of leftover lentils to a family waiting by the temple gate. The mother thanks you and tells her children, "See, the moon remembers us." You're not sure what's more touching, the gratitude or the quiet confidence that celestial timing somehow trickles down into dinner. As you prepare to leave the temple, you glance up at the night sky. The moon hangs there, full and content, its edges softly glowing. You think about all the meals you've rushed through, all the food you've scarfed down in front of screens or eaten out of boredom. And here, in a world thousands of years older, food is timed like a ritual, honored like a guest, and offered not just to the gods, but to the night itself. You take a deep breath and let the silence wash over you. Maybe eating by moonlight wouldn't just change your schedule, it might just change your soul. You wake to the sound of scribes whispering over wax tablets, their styluses scratching in neat, deliberate strokes as the morning haze lifts from the ziggurat's highest platform. Down below, the city hums with a strangely excited rhythm. People aren't just talking, they're calculating, comparing, theorizing. Because today, you're stepping into one of the more baffling and ambitious aspects of ancient Babylonian life. Their obsession with predicting the moon's behavior. Not just watching it, not just recording it, but actually trying to forecast it. Imagine a civilization where math isn't something you grumble through in school, it's something you use to outsmart the sky. If the gods can hide the moon, the Babylonians figured, then maybe the right equation could pry back the curtain. So you wander toward the temple's scribal quarter, where the air smells like burnt resin and tired genius. One priest waves you over and shows you a small clay tablet filled with rows of tiny cuneiform numbers. He points to a line and says, That's where we found out the moon was cheating. Okay, he's being dramatic, but the line he's pointing to marks a correction, some long-dead astronomer's decision that the existing prediction system wasn't accurate enough. See, the Babylonians had this thing called the Saros cycle, a pattern of roughly 18 years and 11 days that helped them predict eclipses and moon risings with near-terrifying accuracy. It wasn't just random guesswork. It was built from generations of lunar observations scratched onto tablets, all carefully preserved and consulted. If the moon was 5 degrees too high, noted. If it turned red 2 hours earlier than expected, logged. And if, heaven forbid, a full moon appeared on an inauspicious day, mass panic, or at least a few anxious goats sacrificed for insurance. You shuffle through tablet after tablet with your guide, noting how each scribe's style is different. Some use sweeping curves, others tight, tidy wedges. There's even an inside joke scratched into one. If the moon is late again, blame Nabu's sandals. Mainstream historians agree that the Babylonians tracked lunar motion with astonishing rigor. But they still argue over whether their predictions were fully scientific or just deeply religious rituals dressed in math. After all, it's hard to separate belief from observation when your society sees gods in the sky and numbers in every breath. You're shown a famous tablet from the city of Sippar, now chipped and worn, but still readable. It outlines a calculation, predicting the moon's appearance across several years. The numbers line up shockingly well with modern software projections. "The moon rises where we said it would," says a young apprentice with the tired pride of someone who's spent a week copying decimal points. She listens to us. Sometimes. Still, even this hyper-accurate system wasn't perfect. One of your favorite tidbits comes from a fringe tablet found half buried in the ruins of Uruk. It includes a table of expected moon heights, with a few sarcastic side notes clearly added later. One scribble says, "Moon seen by nobody. Possibly. Drunk." Another reads, "Clouds again. Burn this tablet." It's oddly comforting to know that even the most serious moon trackers had off days and bad weather. You can picture some poor apprentice squinting at the sky, completely unsure if that faint smear was the moon, or just last night's fig beer messing with his vision. As your tour continues, you're handed a replica of one of the most mysterious tablets, the so-called Lunar 6. It outlines 6 variables, like the time between moonrise and sunrise, that helped Babylonian astronomers calculate everything from eclipse timing to which God was likely to show up uninvited. Scholars still debate the exact purpose of the Lunar 6, with some saying it was a celestial GPS, others arguing it was a kind of horoscopic cheat sheet. You're inclined to believe both. The math is real, but the purpose? Shrouded in moonlight. One thing is clear. Babylonian moon prediction wasn't just a nerdy pastime. It had political consequences. Kings would delay or advance campaigns based on lunar forecasts. Merchants timed their trade routes to avoid danger moons. And priests, well, they made sure their power stayed aligned with the heavens, literally. You sit in on a moon school lesson for young acolytes. The teacher, a stern, older priest with ink-stained robes, is walking them through how to correct for lunar parallax, a fancy way of saying, sometimes the moon looks weird depending on where you stand. It involves diagrams, inked strings, and a clay ball they call Lil Sin, after the moon god. The students seem bored, but you can tell they'll remember every word. Because in Babylon, knowing when the moon would appear wasn't just useful. It was a form of social currency. Being the person who could say, "Wait 3 nights and then offer figs," made you very popular with both the temple and your neighbors. Outside the scribal chamber, you come across a peculiar ritual site where prediction and performance collide. On the night before a full moon, local observers gather here to recite the expected moonrise time, placing bets, yes, literal bets, on how close they'll get. It's not gambling in the modern sense. It's more like ritual bravado. If someone gets it exactly right, they're gifted a silk sash and declared moonwise for the month. If they're way off, they have to clean the shrine's pigeon roost. One man boasts that he once predicted a lunar eclipse to the minute and was rewarded with a kiss from the high priest's niece. Or maybe it was the other way around, he admits with a grin. Either way, the moon prediction game has high stakes. Now, remember that moon phase cake you saw back in section 12? Here's where it makes a reappearance. Turns out the cakes weren't just symbolic. They were also used to visualize the moon's future positions. Imagine cutting a crescent-shaped pastry into smaller arcs and using them to track waxing and waning over 30 days. A literal, edible calendar. Your guide shrugs and says, "It was delicious math." You're tempted to try it, but the last, surviving mooncake bakery charges in silver, not curiosity. As dusk falls, you're handed a fresh wax tablet and invited to try making your own lunar prediction. It feels absurd. You barely know what day it is, but your host insists. So you squint at the sky, note the faint smudge of the waxing gibbous, estimate the angle, poorly, and declare, "Full moon in 2 days, 4 hours." Your host pretends to write it down. "We'll see," he says, with a knowing smirk. You have a feeling he's heard worse. Still, for one shining moment, you feel connected to something older than time, a civilization that dared to chart the future by the light of a wandering god. And maybe, just maybe, you got it right. You're half asleep on a stone bench now, belly full of date bread, and your mind spinning from all the moon math, when someone nudges your shoulder gently, an elderly priest with white coal lining his eyes, and a voice like sand slipping through. Your fingers. Come, he says. We need your help timing lunch. You blink at him, confused, until he gestures upward with his carved walking stick. The moon, pale and smudged against the azure morning sky, still clings stubbornly to the heavens. And that's when it clicks. This isn't a joke. In ancient Babylon, even lunch could be astronomically aligned. You stand, stretch, and follow him through a corridor scented with pressed olive oil and damp clay. He explains that Babylonian mealtimes, especially in temples and among upper classes, weren't simply decided by hunger or convenience. They were calibrated by celestial markers, and the moon played a role far more often than you'd guess. Lunchtime, he says, is not when your stomach growls. It's when the moon tells us. You smirk. Of course it is. You step into what appears to be an early kitchen, a communal cooking space with wide flat hearths, enormous ceramic bowls, and even a few fish suspended in clay brine pots. The kitchen priestess welcomes you, like you're a long-lost relative. She gestures to a polished obsidian disc embedded in the wall, a kind of shadow clock that works best on moonlit nights and early mornings. She points to its rim. When the moon's reflection reaches this notch, she says, the midday meal begins. You try not to laugh, because the notch is nearly 2 hours away from alignment, so you've got some time. But here's the thing. This wasn't just a quirky priestly tradition. Babylonian calendars and meal customs intertwined. Temple meals were scheduled in strict patterns, some lunar, some solar. Every seventh day, what we might call a Sabbath, had dietary restrictions and required certain offerings that depended on the moon's cycle. Bread couldn't be baked until a particular phase was confirmed. Fruit offerings were denied under eclipses, and meat only on days when the moon was in a favorable gaze, whatever that meant. Mainstream historians have long marveled at how meticulous Mesopotamian ritual timing was, but they still debate whether these lunar cues were more about practicality or control. Were people trying to live harmoniously with nature's rhythms, or were priestly classes just enforcing complex rules to keep themselves in charge? You lean toward a mix of both. After all, Babylon was a city obsessed with order. The moon, ever predictable, became a kind of celestial whistleblower, blinking its way through the sky to remind people when to pray, when to cook, and yes, when to eat. You're handed a small slab of wax with a mealtime diagram sketched onto it. There are 6 symbols: the moon, the sun, a triangle, 2 birds, and a fish. The priestess taps the triangle. It stands for meal shadow. When it's equidistant between moonrise and sunset, it's considered the ideal time for digestion. The gods favor light stomachs at dawn, she jokes. But at noon, let them eat lentils. You're invited to observe the lunar cooks, a team of older women and a few cheerful teenage boys who measure ingredients by moon fingers, a rough gauge of how high the moon is in the sky. If the moon is 4 fingers above the palm, it's time to season the stew. If it's 3 fingers and fading, add barley. 1 finger and nearly gone. Stop everything, serve the meal, and don't look back. These measures, of course, vary wildly depending on your perspective and height, but that doesn't stop them from being ritualized. And as you watch the stew simmer in a massive clay cauldron, its aroma catching the wind and sailing across the courtyard, you realize this isn't about precision. It's about participating in a rhythm, a lunar rhythm, a story told over and over in phases and reflections and little shimmering arcs. One of the more unusual fringe facts you learn today is that certain temples kept a moon lunch scroll, a parchment or tablet where they'd record how meals went depending on lunar phase. On full moons, for instance, bread was thought to rise higher. Under crescent moons, beans boiled faster. These records were partly scientific and partly poetic, with entries like moon veiled in clouds, soup thin, morale lower than figs. You're shown a replica of one such scroll, And you can't help but laugh at an entry that simply reads, "New moon, everyone cranky, no dessert." Whether or not there's truth to these lunar culinary observations, the Babylonians believed in them deeply enough to make them part of their ritual lives. And the most devout households even set aside moon plates, special dishes reserved only for meals consumed under specific phases. It wasn't superstition to them, it was etiquette. The debate among modern scholars now centers on whether lunar-timed meals were genuinely based on celestial movement or simply religious dogma. Some believe the moon offered a practical agricultural clock, harvests and meals syncing with visible changes in the night sky. Others argue it was just another layer of ritual performance. But to you, standing in a temple kitchen where even a bowl of chickpeas carries sacred timing, it feels less like a debate and more like a commitment, a full-body embrace of lunar life. You're eventually asked to help serve the midday meal, which is a surprisingly formal affair. Priests and priestesses sit in careful rows on mats, eating with carved wooden spoons, and occasionally chanting short verses to Sin, the moon god. You're given a steaming bowl of barley stew and a sliver of roasted fig. The priest next to you leans over and whispers, "The moon was favorable this morning. That's why the figs caramelized." You nod, not because you believe him, but because you're starting to want to. Outside, in the shadow of a smaller ziggurat, a group of children play a game that's part hopscotch, part lunar calendar quiz. One child calls out a moon phase, and the others leap to the square that matches its timing. Waning crescent, third night of fullness, invisible sliver. It's adorable chaos, but also a kind of playful indoctrination. These kids aren't just memorizing moon facts, they're embodying them. And as the sun creeps westward and the moon fades from view, you begin to feel that this obsession wasn't so strange after all. In a world without clocks or apps or even paper calendars, the sky was the only reliable schedule. It made sense to eat by it, sleep by it, and yes, complain about soggy lentils under it. You walk back through the kitchen as cleanup begins. The obsidian disk now reflects only sky, no moon to be seen. The priestess looks at you and says, "Next meal will be under a gibbous. Bring your appetite." You nod, full in both belly and thought. There's something deliciously comforting in letting the cosmos set your table. No decisions, no guesswork. Just look up, trust the timing, and pass the lentils. The sun dips low behind the edge of a mud brick tower, casting long ochre shadows across the tiled plaza. And once again, your bare feet brush against the coolness of compacted earth as you drift back toward the temple's western wing. The heat of the day is ebbing slowly, like the tide of a lazy river turning in on itself. This is the part of the day the Babylonians referred to as shadow crossing, the time when the long rays of light stretch across courtyards and whisper secrets. Only the evening understands. And you're still thinking about lunch, not just because the barley stew is still making its presence known in your belly, but because it turns out that the Babylonians didn't consider food to be done with just because the pot was empty. Meals were never isolated events. They rippled forward into the evening, their timing still measured, still logged, still evaluated. And tonight, like every night, someone would record how long the food lingered on the breath, how the moon's silence affected digestion, and which celestial signs would shape tomorrow's breakfast. Welcome to the world's earliest food journaling. You wander past a scribe seated under a fig tree, scratching notes into a wax tablet. He looks up and grins. "Still thinking about stew?" he asks without looking at your face. "Don't worry, I wrote it down." You peer over his shoulder and catch a glimpse of the entry. Barley stew, fig garnish, consumed under waning moon. No heartburn reported. One priest claimed clarity of thought. You stifle a chuckle. Apparently, even a good burp might be attributed to lunar influence. The Babylonians truly believed that what went in and how it came out could be traced to the stars and phases of the moon, and they weren't shy about collecting that data. Now, before you scoff too hard, remember, we do the same thing with apps. You log your sleep, your water intake, your steps, your mood. maybe even your blood oxygen levels. They logged figs. The system was simple. Each temple employed what was, essentially, a food astrologer, a specialist trained in both astronomy and digestion. After meals, this individual would observe the diners, take notes on energy levels, mood, prayer performance, and even bodily sounds. If 2 or more people sneezed after a lentil dish served during the 3rd quarter moon, that meal would be flagged as unbalanced. If everyone napped peacefully after a cucumber and beer lunch during a full moon, that recipe went into the temple archive. And yes, beer was definitely part of the culinary record. Babylonians were early masters of brewing, often mixing herbs or honey to balance the moon's chill. Some even argued that certain brews could amplify lunar visions. Historians still argue whether these meal reports were sincere data or elaborate ritual compliance sheets designed to impress temple leadership. But the records endure, and they're rich with both food facts and human quirks. Take, for example, the curious note in one ancient clay tablet discovered near the Temple of Ishtar. Date cakes caused extreme dreaming. Priestess reported visit from moonbeast with silver toes. Meal deemed successful. Now, whether that priestess actually saw a lunar cryptid or just had a strong reaction to fermented honey, we'll never know. But the entry was preserved, etched in cuneiform, alongside other more mundane notes like onion broth, one argument, at table. Clearly, not every dish was celestial harmony. As you follow a group of scribes walking toward the main archives, arms full of tablets and scrolls, you begin to understand how detailed and surprisingly honest these records were. Unlike later cultures that might suppress or sanitize awkward outcomes, the Babylonians seem to enjoy documenting both the glorious and the gastrointestinal. A kind of lunar Yelp, if you will. Inside the archive chamber, you're surrounded by what looks like a library, but smells like wet clay and crushed herbs. Dozens of small shelves hold stacks of hardened tablets, each carefully labeled with symbols for time, moon phase, temple wing, and food type. A young apprentice waves you over to a table where she's laying out a series of meal logs from the past month. "This one's interesting," she says, pointing to a record from just 3 nights ago. The moon was new, and the bread didn't rise. Everyone blamed the silence of sin. You blink at her, wondering what the moon god has to do with bread dough, and she answers your unspoken question. Sin governs the inner fluids. If he withdraws, so do the waters, even in dough. You nod slowly, impressed by the metaphor. If nothing else, she hands you a soft reed stylus and gestures toward a fresh wax slate. "You've eaten, you've observed, now it's your turn." You glance at the blank tablet and begin to scratch. Barley stew, fig garnish, eaten under, waning crescent, mood, reflective, energy, medium, dreams, pending. You pause, then add, "No heartburn, yet." She reads over your shoulder and smiles, clearly approving. "We'll archive that. Next week, someone might cook by your pattern." And just like that, you become part of the cycle. It's oddly satisfying. Your lunch, your burp, your barley, reflections, all now part of a 4,000-year-old culinary record. The beauty of it all is how ordinary things were elevated to sacred rhythms. Eating wasn't separate from worship. Digestion wasn't merely a biological function. It was a cosmic response, and this belief stretched into all corners of daily life. Babylonians even had lunar fasting schedules, where entire families would abstain from food during specific phases, believing that the body needed to match the moon's lightness. These fasts were sometimes broken with wild feasts, sometimes with quiet sips of watered beer beneath moonlit courtyards. Your apprentice guide tells you that some households kept miniature moon altars near their kitchen hearths, decorated with silver beads or chalk lines. Offerings of crushed almonds, sweet oil, or sometimes just plain rice, were placed beside these mini altars before every significant meal. "The moon sees what you eat," she says plainly. "So eat in harmony." You leave the archives at twilight, the sky now painted in pale mauve and soft charcoal. The moon is nowhere to be seen, hidden perhaps, or just waiting its turn. The city begins to change with the dimming light. Lamps flicker on. Water jars are covered. The smell of wood smoke wafts in gentle curls. You hear a group of temple servants singing a low tune about the moon's phases and how his crooked smile stirs the soup. It's oddly catchy, and as the first stars prick the evening canvas, you find yourself humming along, belly full and mind swimming. There's something wonderfully reassuring in knowing that even 4,000 years ago, people were just trying to figure out why their bread didn't rise and blaming the moon for feeling sleepy after lunch. So you follow the pathway back to your resting chamber, where a small oil lamp flickers and a faint breeze dances in from the open courtyard. The walls are cool to the touch, the stone under your feet oddly comforting. You sit, write your own final thoughts into a borrowed wax tablet, and place it near the door for the next food astrologer to collect. You've been digested into Babylon's great cycle of eating, observing, dreaming. A city run on starlight, and stew, ink, and intuition. And you? You're just along for the ride. Moon in your mind, fig on your breath, and a vague hope that tomorrow's lentils go a little easier on the temple choir. You wake. Or maybe you never really fell asleep. The city around you is quiet now. The kind of quiet that only exists in civilizations powered by torchlight and temple bells. A light breeze teases the edge of the sleeping mat, fluttering the linen against your ankle. Outside, the first glow of dawn isn't quite visible yet, but the priests are already stirring. You can hear the faint scrape of sandals against stone as someone begins sweeping the courtyard. Your stomach, still full from yesterday's stew, rumbles in protest or anticipation. You're not sure which. The Babylonians, after all, didn't really do breakfast the way you think of it. Not a quick slice of toast or cereal bar, but a slow re-entry into the waking world, marked by ritual sips of water, a recitation of celestial alignments, and maybe a bite of preserved fruit, if the moon was in the right mood. It turns out, even the act of breaking the fast had lunar instructions. You sit up and run your fingers along the grooves in the wax tablet beside you. It's been collected already. Some scribal apprentice has taken your musings and filed them away into the ever-growing vault of food and moon data. You've become a statistic now. Congratulations. But also, welcome to the earliest known version of what modern people might call biohacking. The idea that your mood, sleep, digestion, and dreams could all be tied not only to your meals but also to the moon's phases might sound eccentric now. But in Babylon, this was cutting-edge science. Or at least what passed for science when everyone still thought crocodile dung worked as birth control. Historians still argue whether these morning rituals were genuinely believed or performed mostly for show, a kind of celestial cosplay that allowed temples to maintain control over the routines of the people. But when you're here, breathing the same spiced air and watching the same rituals unfold with quiet devotion, it's hard not to feel like everyone truly believed it mattered. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders and step outside. The air still holds the chill of night, but the horizon is beginning to pulse with orange. Somewhere to your right, a priest is chanting softly to greet the new day, and you follow the sound. It leads you toward the temple's eastern face, where a small platform overlooks the city's rooftops. From here, you can see smoke beginning to curl from cook fires. Another day of watching, eating, recording. But this morning, there's something different. A procession is forming at the edge of the square, children carrying bowls of fruit, elders in layered robes, and a few bored-looking oxen hitched to a cart stacked with clay tablets. You ask a young girl what's happening, and she shrugs. Lunar archive rotation, she says. They're retiring the old tablets and copying the good ones to new stone. You blink. Of course. The Babylonians didn't just record. Oh, no, they curated. They believed not every observation deserved preservation. Only the most useful or spiritually aligned meals made the cut for long-term storage. And what happened to the others? She points to a pile near the cart. Broken, ground down, sometimes reused as building material. A kind of celestial compost, heap. You walk alongside the procession, feeling oddly sentimental about the idea that someone's heartfelt note about fig-induced dreaming might be crushed into the foundation of a bakery. But perhaps that's fitting. Ideas feeding the earth that feeds the people. The cart comes to a halt near the temple library, and a group of elders begin reviewing the tablets by candlelight, murmuring over the symbols, making small marks to indicate which entries will be copied and which will meet their sandy end. You watch one of them pause at a tablet, frown and mutter, "Too much coriander, not enough moon." He places it on the discard pile. You suppress a laugh. Somewhere in the past, someone really thought that coriander salad under a waning gibbous was worth recording. And now, it's rubble. It's oddly comforting. Even in Babylon, not every big idea made the cut. Inside the scriptorium, scribes begin the painstaking process of transferring the approved entries. You sit beside one of them, watching as he presses a reed stylus into a fresh clay slab, his fingers quick and practiced. "This one," he says, not looking up, "is a record of fermented barley patties consumed during a lunar eclipse. One priest vomited, 2 reported dreams of drowning. Considered a poor omen." You tilt your head. "But you're preserving it." He nods. "It was bad, but useful. We learn from mistakes." The slab beside it is more cheerful. Stewed, lentils, honey glaze, consumed during full moon. Temple choir sang without error, no vomiting. Gold star. This entry gets the high-grade clay. As you watch him work, you start to understand that the Babylonians didn't separate the sacred from the mundane. Dreams, meals, digestion, moonlight, it all went into the same ledger. And over time, patterns emerged. People began to notice that certain combinations worked, that the moon's angle really did seem to affect not only the mood of a meal, but its outcome. Whether or not it was strictly true didn't matter. Belief created consistency, and consistency created control. This, perhaps, was the secret power of Babylon's food tracking system. Not precision, not science as we define it today, but structure, ritual. The feeling that in a world full of floods, famines, and occasionally fire-breathing gods, at least your lunch could be logged and understood. You wander deeper into the archives and find a tablet that stops you cold. Its title, etched in confident script, reads, "When Food Defies the Moon." Beneath that, in smaller writing, "On a Tuesday, under a crescent moon, the stew turned bitter, despite all omens suggesting sweetness." This was recorded without explanation. The priest who cooked it later claimed a bird flew over the pot. You stare at it for a long moment. It's not the stew that surprises you, it's the honesty, the acknowledgement that sometimes, even in this world where the moon was practically a culinary consultant, things just didn't make sense. And the Babylonians didn't erase those moments. They wrote them down, a kind of ancient shrug. Later, as the day blooms fully and the plaza fills with the noise of everyday life, merchants calling, children playing, someone loudly proclaiming the price of chickpeas, you find yourself at a food stall. The vendor offers you a flatbread rolled with pickled vegetables and a smear of garlic paste. You take it, bite into it, and immediately feel a rush of both flavor and memory. It's good. It's simple. You glance up at the sky. The moon is invisible now, somewhere behind the bright curtain of day. But you wonder if it's still watching, quietly jotting down your review. Flatbread, garlic, joy. You smile, wipe your mouth with the corner of your sleeve, and decide to write your own note when you return to the temple. Not because anyone's asking, but because someone might find it later. Someone like you, wondering why ancient people cared so much about snacks and shadows and the pull of lunar gravity on the shape of a melon slice. The world keeps turning, the moon keeps phasing, and somewhere in this dusty city, your lunch is already halfway to becoming history. Or at least, compost for the next great idea. As the heat of the afternoon deepens and the streets of Babylon shimmer beneath the weight of a high sun, you find yourself drawn once more to the quiet interior of the ziggurat's upper levels. Up here, removed from the clamour of traders and livestock and clanging bronze. There's only the soft rustle of linen and the gentle slosh of water jars being refilled. The air is cooler, shaded by thick stone walls and a roof that filters the sunlight into honey-coloured beams. You sit cross-legged beneath one of these, nibbling on a dried fig as you listen to the rhythmic chants of scribes copying old recipes by moonlight. Or at least, the theoretical moonlight. Today, the moon won't be visible until much later, and yet they copy by its imaginary glow, the way a theatre actor performs a sword fight even when the blade is made of painted wood. This devotion to celestial mimicry doesn't seem odd anymore. You've spent enough time here to realize that Babylon's greatest strength isn't just its knowledge, it's its willingness to pretend, consistently, until pretending becomes truth. You chew slowly, eyes drifting over the ornate wall carvings that depict a familiar scene, priests and cooks side by side, preparing food beneath an exaggerated crescent moon. One priest holds a spoon, another holds a star chart. The boundary between culinary and cosmic has vanished entirely. You've been invited to join a small gathering this evening, something halfway between a meal and a moon ceremony, hosted by one of the senior temple astronomers. You're not quite sure whether to expect an academic lecture, a dinner party, or a pagan rave. But you agree anyway, mostly because the invitation included the phrase, assorted pastries. You head there just as the sun begins to dip low, painting the Tigris with strips of molten gold. The astronomers' quarters are tucked behind the main temple, a modest room with wide open windows and a domed ceiling painted with constellations. The guests are a mix of scribes, cooks, herbalists, and one boy who might just be there for the desserts. The host, tall, sun-weathered, and wearing robes dyed a deep lunar blue, welcomes you with a nod and hands you a goblet of date wine. "We begin when the sky forgets the sun," he says cryptically, then turns to poke at a clay oven that smells like roasted sesame and honey. You take a seat beside a basket of flatbreads and eavesdrop on the conversations around you. One scribe is arguing about whether lentils should only be eaten during waxing moons. They absorb too much moisture during waning phases, he insists. The texture is wrong, mushy, depressing, it's science. Another is debating the dream-enhancing qualities of sheep's milk versus goat's milk. Goat milk brings dreams of travel, she says, but sheep's milk gives prophetic visions, if you're lucky, or nightmares about fish. No one laughs. They're completely serious, but you've learned to accept that in Babylon, these conversations aren't nonsense. They're the ancient version of wellness blogs, crossed with horoscopes, crossed with what would happen if Yelp reviews were written by astronomers in sandals. The moon is now visible, just barely, a smudge of silver behind the clouds. That's the signal. Your host claps once, and everyone gathers around the low table. On it are dozens of small dishes, herbed cheeses, pickled cucumbers, chickpea patties, fried onions, and thin strips of spiced lamb. In the center, a large dish of barley porridge shaped like a crescent moon. No one eats right away. Instead, the host raises his arms and begins to recite a lunar prayer, not in reverent tones, but with the easy cadence of someone reading a dinner menu aloud for dramatic effect. The moon, he explains, has entered a transitional phase, just past first quarter, a good time for reflection, experimentation, and foods that won't embarrass you in front of your ancestors. This gets a chuckle. Apparently, even ancient Babylonians had culinary shame. The meal begins, slowly, deliberately, with each person offering a small observation as they eat. This cheese feels thoughtful. The barley porridge is unusually confident tonight. You follow along, offering your own nonsensical interpretations. This chickpea is withholding secrets. No one questions you. You belong now. Somewhere between a guest and a cult member, you've become fluent in moonspeak. As the night deepens, the wine flows more freely and conversation drifts into the philosophical. One woman wonders aloud whether the moon even cares about their rituals. What if it's just floating there, bored, watching us make casseroles in its name? The host smiles. Then at least we've given it a good show. Historians still argue whether these moon-centric feasts were deeply spiritual or just excuses to gather and gossip. Evidence points in both directions. Some tablets treat lunar menus with deadly seriousness, complete with warnings about mixing garlic and leeks under a blood moon. Others read more like parody with sarcastic commentary about a priest's unwise fondness for goat stew during an eclipse. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Ritual wrapped in sarcasm, devotion served with a side of dry humour. As dessert arrives, little honey cakes shaped like stars, the astronomer begins reading from a particularly old tablet. This entry, he says, comes from the reign of Amisaduqa. It describes a dream the king had after eating pickled onions under a full moon. You brace yourself. He dreamt that the moon turned to bread and that he was both eating it and being eaten by it. Everyone goes quiet. So, the host continues, we conclude that pickled onions are not suitable for prophetic dreams, but they are excellent for metaphysical nightmares. More laughter. You linger long after the food is gone, sipping the last of the wine and watching the moon drift higher in the sky. The air is cool now, threaded with the scent of cardamom and wood smoke. Someone is snoring softly in the corner, a half-eaten fig still in their hand. You stretch out on a woven mat, letting your mind wander, wondering what it would be like if modern life still revolved around the phases of the moon. Imagine changing your grocery list based on lunar charts, or blaming your bad cooking on Mercury being in retrograde's older, more lunar cousin. The idea doesn't seem so silly anymore. There's something comforting about it. Predictable, rhythmic, human. Later, as you make your way back through the quiet temple corridors, the moonlight dances across the tiled floor, casting shifting patterns that look almost like writing. You pause, imagining that if you stared long enough, they might reveal the perfect midnight snack. Maybe they already have. You smile to yourself, take one last glance at the moon, silent, smug, eternal, and whisper a quiet thanks before heading off to bed. You wake to the soft sound of sandals on stone, a rhythm so familiar now it barely registers as footsteps at all, just part of the city's natural breathing. The moon has long since set, the sky now tinted that particular greyish pink that happens just before the sun gathers the courage to rise again. You stretch beneath a thin linen sheet, the scent of last night's honey cakes still faint on your fingers, and ease yourself upright to find that the temple is already humming. Somewhere beyond the arched window, the river sighs against its banks and birds chirp lazily from the palms near the market, but it's the low murmur of voices that pulls you into motion. Another gathering is beginning, not a feast this time, but a debate. Today, you're being invited into the oldest Babylonian tradition of all, arguing in good faith about what the moon actually means. You pull your tunic over your head, splash your face with cool water from a copper basin, and follow the voices, down a curved corridor until you emerge into a semi-open courtyard lined with sun-warmed bricks. A small group has assembled, seated on stools or cushions, each person armed with a wax tablet and an eyebrow permanently raised in scholarly judgment. You've never seen this particular group before, though you recognize the energy instantly. Part book club, part courtroom, part spiritual improv. The leader of the session is a lean man with expressive hands and a robe embroidered with constellations. He welcomes you with a distracted nod and says, "Today we consider whether lunar timing improves digestion or merely gives the illusion of predictability. It's going to be a long morning." You settle in beside a woman who smells faintly of cedar and ink, and she hands you a sticky date without looking. "For clarity of thought," she whispers, "or sugar, one of those." The debate begins in earnest, with a short reading from a centuries-old commentary attributed to a scholar named Epi Rabasu. In it, the moon is blamed for everything, from slow-cooked lentils to slow-moving bowels. You blink. "He really went all in on the digestion angle," someone murmurs. The group laughs, but then the discussion turns serious. One man argues that lunar timing was essential for managing Babylon's street-level chaos. Think of it. Markets, meals, even temple schedules were planned by celestial cues. If the moon said, "Eat now," people didn't argue. They lined up. Another disagrees. It was symbolism, not logistics. People ate when they were hungry. The moon just gave them permission to pretend they had control. You're impressed by how quickly the conversation spins from astronomy to psychology, to street food. Someone brings up an old folk belief that lentil soup made under a waxing moon brings good luck, while soup under a waning moon guarantees bad dreams. Historians still argue whether that's literal or just lunar-themed comfort food advice, the leader muses. But my cousin swears it works. They pause for water and dried melon slices, then dive right back in, this time exploring how certain Babylonian food vendors actually advertised by moon phase. Half-price beer during full moons, one scribe jokes. Except the beer was mostly water, and the discount meant smaller cups. You're struck by how much of this echoes modern life. Swapping astrology apps for clay tablets, food delivery for temple feasts, skeptical tweets for sarcastic scribes. It's all the same dance, just with different choreography. The moon, apparently, has always been a marketing tool. After the debate winds down, you wander into the city proper, passing vendors just setting up their stalls beneath awnings that flap gently in the breeze. You catch snippets of conversation. Someone complaining about spoiled chickpeas, another swearing that boiled eggs always come out better during a full moon. At this point, it's hard to tell which beliefs are ancient truth and which are just surviving lunch hacks. You stop at a stand selling something that looks like a savory pancake, folded around spiced vegetables and drizzled with sesame oil. The vendor grins. "Best during a first quarter moon," he says. You raise an eyebrow. "You make them during every phase." He shrugs. "But they taste better when you believe." Touché. Later, back at the temple's archive wing, you're shown a collection of lunar food calendars carved into stone. Each one is beautifully preserved, with little pictograms of different dishes aligned with moon phases, stars, and symbols you don't recognize. One stone tablet features a detailed warning about not mixing lentils and lamb during the last 3 nights before a new moon, accompanied by a crude drawing of someone clutching their stomach. Another suggests that honey cakes left out under moonlight attract both blessings and ants. A metaphor, the archivist insists. Or possibly just practical advice. The archivist, a quiet man with silver-threaded hair, points to a chart from the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar II. "Here," he says, "we see the moon used not just for meals, but to schedule diplomatic dinners, temple offerings, and even sleep cycles. This entire section," he taps the stone, "is about which nights are best for going to bed after stew versus after a salad." You stifle a laugh. "So, ancient Babylon had bedtime food theories?" He nods solemnly. Sleep, digestion, and moonlight, the eternal trio. You think about your own erratic sleep schedule and how it might improve if you simply blamed the moon for everything. "Sorry I missed the meeting. Mercury was fine, but the moon said no." You smile at the thought. A simpler world, in a way, or at least a more poetic one. You head upstairs, into a part of the archive that's open to the air. The view stretches across the rooftops, over gardens and courtyards, and the ever-churning life of a city that somehow remains both ancient and recognizable. The sun is higher now, painting the buildings in bold amber strokes, but it's the absence of the moon you feel most strongly. Its retreat into invisibility making everything it once illuminated feel slightly mysterious, a little empty. You realize that the Babylonians may have known this feeling too, that their obsession with lunar timing wasn't just about food or feasts, but about understanding rhythms that made life feel less chaotic. If the moon says it's time to eat lentils, you eat lentils, not because of science, because it feels right, because it anchors you. That evening, you join another quiet gathering. This one's smaller, just a few young initiates, a candle, and a shallow bowl of dates soaked in wine. There's no ritual this time, no prayer, no chart, just reflection. One of the initiates speaks softly about the moon's absence, calling it a rest between chapters. Another describes it as a turning page, And a third says it reminds him to cook rice slowly. You don't interrupt. You simply watch the sky, dark and blank, waiting for the sliver of silver to reappear, to nudge the cycle back into motion. Around you, people chew slowly, sigh softly, and reach instinctively for more wine. The stars begin to bloom above, and with them returns that quiet, persistent understanding. This has all happened before. It will happen again. And whether or not the moon cares about your lentils, the act of paying attention to the sky, to your hunger, to your own inner tide, is what makes you human.